The IPCC Fifth Assessment Report emphasizes that behavior, lifestyle, and cultural change have a high mitigation potential in some sectors, particularly when complementing technological and structural change. In general, high consumption lifestyles have a greater environmental impact. Several scientific studies have shown that when people, especially those living in developed countries, but more generally including all countries, wish to reduce their carbon footprint, there are four key high-impact actions they can take. Action number 1, not having an additional child. 58.6 tons carbon dioxide equivalent emission reductions per year. Action number 2, living car-free. 2.4 tons carbon dioxide savings. Action number 3, avoiding one round-trip transatlantic flight. 1.6 tons savings. Action number 4, eating a plant-based diet. 0.8 tons savings. These appear to differ significantly from the popular advice for greening one's lifestyle, which seem to fall mostly into the low-impact category. Replacing a typical car with a hybrid, 0.52 tons, washing clothes in cold water, 0.25 tons, recycling, 0.21 tons, upgrading light bulbs, 0.10 tons, etc. The researchers found that public discourse on reducing one's carbon footprint overwhelmingly focuses on low-impact behaviors, and that mention of the high-impact behaviors is almost non-existent in the mainstream media, government publications, K-12 schools, textbooks, etc. The researchers added that our recommended high-impact actions are more effective than many more commonly discussed options. For example, eating a plant-based diet saves 8 times more emissions than upgrading light bulbs. More significantly, a US family who chooses to have one fewer child would provide the same level of emissions reductions as 684 teenagers who choose to adopt comprehensive recycling for the rest of their lives. Overall, food accounts for the largest share of consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions, with nearly 20% of the global carbon footprint, followed by housing, mobility, services, manufactured products, and construction. Food and services are more significant in poor countries, while mobility and manufactured goods are more significant in rich countries. A 2014 study into the real-life diets of British people estimates their greenhouse gas contributions to be 7.19 kilograms per day for high-meat eaters through to 3.81 kilograms per day for vegetarians and 2.89 kilograms per day for vegans. The widespread adoption of a vegetarian diet could cut food-related greenhouse gas emissions by 63% by 2050. China introduced new dietary guidelines in 2016, which aimed to cut meat consumption by 50% and thereby reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030. A 2016 study concluded that taxes on meat and milk could simultaneously result in reduced greenhouse gas emissions and healthier diets. The study analyzed surcharges of 40% on beef and 20% on milk, and suggests that an optimum plan would reduce emissions by 1 billion tons per year. Efficient energy use, sometimes simply called energy efficiency, is the goal of efforts to reduce the amount of energy required to provide products and services. For example, insulating a home allows a building to use less heating and cooling energy to achieve and maintain a comfortable temperature. Installing light emission diode lighting, fluorescent lighting, or natural skylight windows reduces the amount of energy required to attain the same level of illumination compared to using traditional incandescent light bulbs. Compact fluorescent lamps use only 33% of the energy and may last 6 to 10 times longer than incandescent lights. Light emission diode lamps use only about 10% of the energy an incandescent lamp requires. Energy efficiency has proved to be a cost-effective strategy for building economies without necessarily growing energy consumption. For example, the state of California began implementing energy efficiency measures in the mid-1970s including building code and appliance standards with strict efficiency requirements. During the following years, California's energy consumption has remained approximately flat on a per capita basis, while national United States consumption doubled. As part of its strategy, California implemented a loading order for new energy resources that puts energy efficiency first, renewable electricity supply second, and new fossil-fired power plants last. Energy conservation is broader than the energy efficiency in that it encompasses using less energy to achieve a lesser energy demanding service, for example through behavioral change, as well as encompassing energy efficiency. Examples of conservation without efficiency improvements would be heating a room less in winter, driving less, or working in a less brightly lit room. As with other definitions, the boundary between efficient energy use and energy conservation can be fuzzy, but both are important in environmental and economic terms. This is especially the case when actions are directed at the saving of fossil fuels. Reducing energy use is seen as a key solution to the problem of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. According to the International Energy Agency, improved energy efficiency in buildings, industrial processes, and transportation could reduce the world's energy needs in 2050 by one-third and help control global emissions of greenhouse gases. Fuel switching on the demand side refers to changing the type of fuel used to satisfy a need for an energy service. To meet key decarbonization goals like the 80% reduction by 2050 goal being discussed in California and the European Union, many primary energy changes are needed. Energy efficiency alone may not be sufficient to meet these goals. Switching fuels used on the demand side will help lower carbon emissions. Progressively, coal, oil, and eventually natural gas for space and water heating in buildings will need to be reduced. For an equivalent amount of heat, burning natural gas produces about 45% less carbon dioxide than burning coal. There are various ways in which this could happen, and different strategies will likely make sense in different locations. While the system efficiency of a gas furnace may be higher than the combination of natural gas power plant and electric heat, the combination of the same natural gas power plant and an electric heat pump has lower emissions per unit of heat delivered in all but the coldest climates. This is possible because of the very efficient coefficient of performance of heat pumps. At the beginning of this century, 70% of all electricity was generated by fossil fuels, and as carbon-free sources eventually make up half of the generation mix, replacing gas or oil furnaces and water heaters with electric ones will have a climate benefit. In areas like Norway, Brazil, or Quebec that have abundant hydroelectricity, electric heat and hot water are common. The economics of switching the demand side from fossil fuels to electricity for heating will depend on the price of fuels versus electricity and the relative prices of the equipment. The Energy Agency Annual Energy Outlook 2014 suggests that domestic gas prices will rise faster than electricity prices, which will encourage electrification in the coming decades. Electrifying heating loads may also provide a flexible resource and can participate in demand response. Since thermostatically controlled loads have an inherent energy storage, electrification of heating would provide a valuable resource to integrate variable renewable sources into the grid. Alternatives to electrification include decarbonizing pipeline gas through power-to-gas, biogas, or other carbon-neutral fuels. A 2015 study by Energy and Environmental Economics shows that a hybrid approach of decarbonizing pipeline gas, electrification, and energy efficiency can meet carbon reduction goals at a similar cost as only electrification and energy efficiency in Southern California. Expanding intermittent electrical sources, such as wind power, creates a growing problem balancing grid fluctuations. Some of the plans include building pumped storage or continental supergrids costing billions of dollars. However, instead of building for more power, there are a variety of ways to affect the size and timing of electricity demand on the consumer side. Designing for reduced demands on a smaller power grid is more efficient and economic than having extra generation and transmission for intermittency, power failures, and peak demands. Having these abilities is one of the chief aims of a smart grid. A smart grid is an electrical grid which includes a variety of operational and energy measures, including smart meters, smart appliances, renewable energy sources, and energy-efficient resources. Electronic power conditioning and control of the production and distribution of electricity are important aspects of the smart grid. Time of use metering is a common way to motivate electricity users to reduce their peak load consumption. For instance, running dishwashers and laundry at night after the peak has passed reduces electricity costs. Dynamic demand plans have devices passively shut off when stress is sensed on the electrical grid. This method may work very well with thermostats when power on the grid sags a small amount. A low power temperature setting is automatically selected, reducing the load on the grid. For instance, millions of refrigerators reduce their consumption when clouds pass over solar installations. Consumers could need to have a smart meter in order for the utility to calculate credits. Demand response devices could receive all sorts of messages from the grid. The message could be a request to use a low power mode similar to dynamic demand, to shut off entirely during a sudden failure on the grid, or notifications about the current and expected prices for power. This would allow electric cars to recharge at the least expensive rates independent of the time of the day. The vehicle-to-grid suggestion would use a car's battery or fuel cell to supply the grid temporarily.